Hello, everybody. This is Monica Paolini from Senza Fili. And today I have the pleasure to talk to Patrick Lopez. He is the Global VP of Product Management for 5G at NEC. And today we're going to talk about Open RAN and in the big picture of Open RAN. What does it mean to work in Open RAN in terms of the big ecosystem? And NEC has an interesting role because it's very wide. And so we're going to get an excellent overview of the end-to-end Open RAN ecosystem. So Patrick, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Monica.
Let's get started, and maybe you can tell us what is that you do at NEC. You've been in telecom for a very long time, and this is your last thing you're doing. So can you tell us what is it you're doing, and what is that NEC is doing as well?
Certainly. So I look after product management for our telecoms products, our connectivity products. Basically, I support the product strategy and planning teams that are looking after our radio products, the radio units, as well as radio software, as well as our transport products and solution, the converge core, as well as all the integration with our ecosystem and with our SMO products and capabilities.
It's a lot of stuff you're doing. It's and what NEC is doing is interesting because clearly you've been around for quite some time, but at the same time you've been mostly focused on the Japanese market, and this is all changing. So maybe you can give us some perspective, because everybody knows who NEC is, but you know, I think it's good to talk about what is that you're doing with it in the Open RAN. Yeah.
Certainly. So NEC is a brand that many will recognize the logo, but not necessarily associated with specifics of telecoms. You might have seen NEC logo on laptops, on monitors, ATMs, medical equipment. And I think that's kind of the strength of NEC. It's a global conglomerate, leader in many technology fields, involved in verticals ranging from retail to hospitality to healthcare to government and defense services, and obviously telecoms as well. But telecoms, NEC has been mostly focused on the domestic Japanese market, where it's been extremely successful over the last 50, 60 years. I believe maybe most of NTT Docomo's network is built by NEC. And if you know of telecoms, you know that until recently, really, until 5G, when you were traveling to Japan, well, you usually would have to change phone or would have limitations in terms of the service that you could access, because the Japanese market was very much in advance, but also very much using technology that were adapted to its specific needs. That's over with 5G. Now you travel to Japan. I was there just last week, and you take any phone from any country, any 5G phone, and you'll have the same service as everybody else. And what that means as well is that the technology that we've developed in Japan for 5G, maybe in advance of phase of many markets, that's technology that's being used as well everywhere in the world right now, and that's why there's a huge opportunity for NEC to actually showcase and deploy its skill set and know-how outside of Japan. So that's why they've asked me to join in and see whether we could bring the NEC brand to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember it used to be always a worrisome thing to go to Japan, because like, what do you do with your phone? You need a new phone. And now, and I guess that's the beauty of Wi-Fi. Well, one of the beauties of 5G, that it just works worldwide. Before it was basically you revert to Wi-Fi as the common ground. So, so this gives NEC the opportunity to get a more global reach
Yes.
in terms of wireless, and also to really use, because you've been working on the Open RAN from the beginning. So what is that in the Open RAN? Because again, oftentimes we think of Open RAN just a front hall interface, but there's way more than that, and you're doing way more. So what are all the pieces, and maybe how is your experience there to that?
Certainly. So NEC has been involved in open and disaggregated network pretty much from the beginning. And few people know it, but the company was the first to commercially launch an open flow capable SDN controller. And basically, Open RAN is a logical development of that. It's just another branch of open and disaggregated network. And NEC has been developing Open RAN products since before it was called Open RAN. And the world's first deployment of Open RAN actually was at Entity Docomo with NEC radios. So that was the first brownfield deployment of Open RAN. And since then, NEC also has deployed the world's first greenfield deployment of Open RAN with Rakuten Mobile in Japan again. And basically, the company has been extremely active in enabling the ecosystem to deploy Open RAN. And as you mentioned, Open RAN is a lot more than just a radio. So we've been deploying Open RAN radios, but we've been also probably the company that has had the most integration with the vendors of software in that field, CU, DU. And you will see also that we are extremely active in that field, and you will see announcements in the near future around also intelligence control for the RAN. So we run the gamut really when it comes to Open RAN right now. We have full product portfolio and partnerships in all these areas.
Yeah, and I think that this is interesting to have a mix of both brownfield and greenfield, because there is a lot of attention in Open RAN is on greenfields, but most operators worldwide, the majority is not greenfield. So we need to think about, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how do you see the difference? What was your experience with the brownfield side, on the greenfield side? Because not that many vendors have that experience, both experiences ongoing, and in the same, basically in the same geographical market. So it's kind of more directly comparable.
Indeed. So as you pointed out, not many vendors have both experience, and they're quite distinct. Obviously, when you're going into a greenfield environment, there's no legacy. So in many cases, operators have different kind of parameters in terms of what it is that they want to achieve. They want to be able to obviously deploy a network fast, a network that's resilient and high performance. They also want to innovate in many cases and deliver a connectivity product that is a little bit different from their competitors in that field. For an incumbent, it's a little different. Here you have to integrate into an existing environment that's not open, that's closed, that have a number of vendors that have their specific implementation. And here, if you want, the challenge is basically to insert yourself within that environment and augment it by providing more capabilities, more capacity, but also by opening up the whole network, basically by providing a true multi-vendor environment. And in many cases, the challenges associated with that are not technical, they're more operational, as well as, in some cases, even political, because not every vendor wants to participate into open and disaggregated networks.
Yes, so basically you need to disaggregate and aggregate it. To some extent, and so it's not just starting from scratch. And that's and I think that's what we're seeing is that with Open RAN, it's not one path for every operator, and it's not that all the greenfields are the same or not the brownfields are the same. So how much variety do you see? Because you have you're Japanese based, but you have also customers in other countries. So you have a broad view of the market. How do you see what are the differences?
So our success, our early success in Japan has drawn international attention. And obviously, every market is moving towards Open RAN, but at a different pace. Many operators are looking at it and trying to understand basically how it applies to their network and how fast or how soon they should be able to deploy it in their networks. And you have different approaches there. You have even among the brownfield operators, you have different perspectives. You know, some operators want to select their vendors themselves. They believe in a true multi-vendor environment, and they believe that themselves they should do the integration because they see that there's huge value in being able to managing the operation of their network going forward. And some operators are selecting that path. Other operators recognize that and recognize that it's a great benefit to them, but they also recognize that they might not be ready to do that just now. Because of skill set, because of resource, because of time to market, simply. And in many cases, they ask NEC to help them in that path, to build the knowledge and to transfer that knowledge so that they can, in time, manage that network that way in a very granular fashion. And then you have a number of operators that, you know, don't want that complexity. They want to be able to buy networks the same way that they've bought network until now. They do see the benefits of having a multi-vendor approach, but they want somebody to put it together for them and integrate it for them and actually deploy it as an end-to-end solution. And in those cases as well, NEC has stepped in and helped basically those operators to basically buy Open RAN like a vertical integrated single vendor platform, but with all the benefits of having a multi-vendor open and disaggregated architecture. And I think that's what differentiates also a little bit NEC from other vendors in that space, is that we're not just a technology vendor, we're just not just a product vendor, but we're a full system integrator as well. So we can provide end-to-end services for planning, for deployment, for operations of those systems as we go forward.
Yes. Now, we're going to go back to the non-system integrator part later, but before we move on, let's talk a little bit about that, because so the idea with Open RAN is that you can mix and match any vendor, basically whatever vendor you want that supports an Open RAN interface, you plug it in. But it's not quite like that, at least not today, in the sense that it's not just like you buy a phone and it works with every network.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more. There's more work that needs to be done, as you say, and some operators want to do it, some wants you to do it. Can you comment on what is the status, how hard it is to get a new vendor, how much system integration do you need? Mm-hmm. And you know, we have to keep in mind that system integration you need it is not just for Open RAN, it's end to end. So can you tell us about what's specific about system integration in Open RAN?
Certainly. So system integration has been around for as long as there have been systems and IT and telecoms, right? It's not something that is an Open RAN specific item. But when we're talking about open and disaggregated network, and specifically in the case of Open RAN, what you're talking about is until now you had one system, a radio unit that was composed of a hardware, antennas array, a broadband, and software, all tightly integrated from a single vendor. And you would find different vendors only at the component layer if you want, but the product was sold by one vendor. Now, we all know the benefits of Open RAN, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but at the architecture level, you're breaking that system. You're breaking it between hardware and software. So now you can buy commercial off-the-shelf hardware on which you put a virtualization layer, a cloud layer, on which you put software to manage the RAN, so the centralized unit and the distributed unit. And then we'll talk about the RIC and the apps later. And then you still have the radio unit itself and the panels to radio. So you have more components. For each of those components, you have a choice of vendor, which means that there's more complexity. The role of system integrator, at least at this point, and our real knowledge and skill set right now, goes beyond just the interoperability of those elements. I think that this is done many times. We see a number of plug fest Nobody doubts that you can put different vendors together, but the difficulty is to attain similar or better level of performance and better level of availability and scalability in this multi-vendor environment than in legacy networks. And that's where the real skill and experience of NEC comes to bear, because we probably are the vendor that has integrated the most permutation between radio units, CUDU, and cloud in the whole market. So we've done it, and not just in the lab, we've done it in the field, in commercial scale, in like downtown, Tokyo, and you're seeing that we're doing it also in Western Europe and in North America. So we have that massive skill set, and well, we're now bringing that to the market. And you've seen also that we've made some acquisition in that space, both on the product side with Blue Danube System, a US-based company that has specialized in creating high performance, small radio units that can behave like massive MIMO units. And more recently, just I think a couple of weeks ago, you've seen the acquisition of Aspire, who is a very reputable, specialized Open RAN and OSS BSS integration system integrator based in Ireland. We have a lot of skills, we have a lot of capabilities, and on top of that, I think that NEC puts his money where his mouth is in actually investing in each of the different elements that we need in order to scale even further.
Yeah, absolutely. And a final sort of question on the SI part is, as you mentioned with Aspire, it's not just a system integration at the RAN, it's end to end. And so when you start about, it's not just CU and DU, but it's also the RIC.
This is also the RIC. It's also the core. Yeah. It's also legacy, by the way. It's not just Open RAN, So it is really being able to provide the glue to insert a new Open RAN system in an existing network and being able to harmoniously scale that up with the existing environment without disruption.
Yeah, what do you see the role of the RIC in all this? How essential is it?
That's really interesting, right? Because basically the RIC today, well, it's a piece of software that is inside the radio units, right? So if you buy a radio from a reputable vendor, they will have an element, it won't be called a RIC, but they will have a piece of software inside that radio that's going to manage the beamforming, is going to manage the massive MIMO, is going to manage the scheduler, and that is proprietary and that's inside that platform, and that can be used only for those products. What's exciting about the RIC is that it's now a standard open interface, series of open interface and standard-based implementation that allows basically for the first time to have that intelligence outside of the radio unit. And what that brings is the capacity to actually deploy that in a true multi-vendor environment and being able to create some very sophisticated connectivity products. And why is that exciting is because basically 5G, the promise of 5G is to create connectivity products that are adapted to the time of the day, adapted to the different verticals and industries, adapted to different devices and use cases, because we all intuitively understand that, like an augmented reality goggles is not going to need the same thing from the network than an autonomous car or from like cooperative robots working in a factory. And until 4G and even until 5G NSA, everybody has the same network, everybody has the same connectivity product. But what Open RAN brings and what core pricing brings is the capacity to create those products very specifically for different use cases. And RIC is an integral part of that, because that's the intelligence that are going to say, okay, those augmented reality goggles, they need very low latency, because if you move your head and the picture doesn't move at the same time as your head, you get sick, you get motion sickness. You need very low latency. You need very high bandwidth downstream. Maybe not as much upstream, okay? The cooperative robot, they don't need very low latency, contrary to everybody, what everybody thinks. They need latency that's synchronized. You need to make sure that those store robots that are working in the same environment, they have exactly the same latency. Doesn't matter whether it's 5 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, it needs to be the same, so that when one moves like that, the other one knows that it cannot move like that. So very simple examples, but you have hundreds, if not thousands, of different mini use cases like that that require specific adjustments of the connectivity, and that's going to be enabled in part by.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess that's the beauty of this, is that you have more choice and flexibility, but at the same time, you need to find a way to manage it. It doesn't, it's not a free lunch in the sense that you have all these features, but you need to know how to.
Well, I'm sure there are vendors out there that are like traditional vendors that promise to be able to do the same thing without the rig, or with the rig, but that works only with their product. And I'm sure they can, you know, I'm sure they'll be able to. But we believe that no single company is going to be able to do all of it, all the slices, all the different use cases. Therefore, in order to get there, you need to have an ecosystem. You need to have partners. You need to enable others to come in, because, simple example, it's more likely that, you know, Hilton hotels is going to come with a slice for hospitality that is going to be successful than a given network operator. Mercedes maybe is going to come with a slice for autonomous vehicles, you know. So you have specialists in specific verticals that have a very strong idea already of how to manage their connectivity. They're just not able to do it because they don't have the remote control. The rig is going to enable that. And because also no vendor will have all the different radios and the different scenarios that it enables, it's important to do that in a multi-vendor environment. And therefore, that's why Open RAN is really important in that, paradigm.
Yeah, no, let's go and talk actually about the radios, that's part. So how do you see that in Open RAN to have system networks that start having the sort of the more advanced, so the massive MIMO? Are we going to start seeing Open RAN in, you know, sort of small cells or simpler configurations and go to massive MIMO, or are we ready to go massive MIMO? What do you see happening there?
Well, I think many vendors started with simpler systems. You know, they started with systems to be deployed either in small cells, in terms of like outdoors or indoors. And like maybe to deploy Open RAN in a rural environment. Certainly when I started in Open RAN myself 6-7 years ago, originally we deployed in a rural environment. Now, what's really important and interesting is that actually NEC went the other way. The NEC started to tackle the most difficult task from the get-go. So NEC is the only company that has deployed commercially at scale massive MIMO Open RAN product in a dense urban environment. And for those of you who have been to Japan and been to Tokyo, you cannot imagine a more dense from a population standpoint, but also a more complex environment from a radio frequency perspective. You have all sorts of different radios. You have a real estate that is very expensive and hard to get by. You have high rise, you have low rise, and you have lots of reflective surfaces. Extremely difficult to provide good coverage and good performance in that environment. And doing that in an Open RAN environment and with massive MIMO requires just a whole lot of technology. So we've been able to do that. And basically, little by little, most markets now are understanding that it's available and it's available at scale. So they're going through their process to integrate that into their plan and deploy that into their networks.
So basically, with Open RAN, you're able to do whatever 5G allows you to do it. You can do Open RAN, non-Open RAN. That doesn't make sense in terms of performance.
Correct. And I don't want to the idea that Open RAN is going to replace all the RAN. I think personally that you will have a space for every category, and it will make sense in some cases to deploy a very specialized and very even vertical and proprietary RAN system from one vendor. In other cases, it will make more sense to have a multi-vendor implementation where you can make use of the resource pooling of the software without having to deploy everything everywhere all the time. So what Open RAN brings is variety and choice and options.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's the beauty. That's the value, that you have a choice.
Yes.
And then you can go whichever way makes sense. Now, let's talk a little bit about the challenges of Open RAN, because there is a lot of people are fully supportive and other like, so what is in terms of the main challenges is like security, cost, power consumption, maturity. What do you think is the biggest challenge, and what is slowing down possibly adoption, or it is not an issue or not issues?
Candidly, I think that what is slowing down the most Open RAN adoption right now is attitude and adversity to risk, which is understandable. I mean, when you are a network operator, you're running a critical infrastructure. You have obligations towards your customers, obviously, but also obligations towards regulators and even governments. So you cannot make those choices lightly. And it is introducing a new vendor into those environments is extremely complex and expensive, let alone several vendors. So I think, Open RAN is progressing reasonably well, actually extremely well, considering our culture in telecoms and what we need to get through in order to be a new vendor in a new environment, And we've seen some new vendors emerge over the years, not only in Open RAN, but generally speaking in Open RAN, in telecoms, and they all have commented on how hard it is sometimes to penetrate those accounts and how long the sales cycles are. And if we look at how fast Open RAN has emerged and reaching a level of maturity that allows its deployment at scale, actually, it's probably one of the fastest moving technology in the telecom market ever. So you talk about a couple of topics: scalability, security, cost of operation, maybe management of the consumption. These are all valid topics that you find in every single new generation and every single new products that are being introduced to the market. And when you look at Open RAN, actually, Open RAN is quite superior in many of the aspects of that, because most Open RAN vendors, it's a new technology, so they're deploying on a cloud-native environment, which means that they are using the latest technology when it comes to managing security by design, when it comes to scale in and scale out, which is so important in terms of performance, but also in terms of power consumption. And that same architecture allows to deploy very small or very big networks, which is very good to be able to address at the same time macro needs, but also private network or specific deployments opportunities. So I think that if we look at all those different aspects of deploying a new technology, Open RAN actually scales much better than previous technologies that we've seen introduced in the market.
Yes, and as you say, it's oftentimes not strictly speaking a technology. It's not technology that limits adoption, it's culture. Yeah. So you can look at it the other way around, that Open RAN is going to change the culture end to end. So it actually has a wider positive effect. And we don't
actually, have to many of our customers are using Open RAN as a device to change their practice, because it is so advanced and because it is cloud native. It's kind of like the preferred project or program if you want to introduce into a network that wants to go towards a more cloud native operation, CI/CD/CD, pipeline management, integration with web scalers, etc. This is all granted with Open RAN. So yes, the adoption curve is steeper because you have more domains to learn. But guess what? These are domains that every network operator has to learn to be successful in 5G. So it's a good, practical exercise to master them all.
Yeah, even if all your network is Open RAN, it's still worth learning how to do it, because then that's an advantage that transfer to the entire network.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. It has been great talking to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot, Monica.
And thank you all for listening. And this conversation is part of a report on the Open RAN ecosystem that you can get at senseofili.com.